May, because the year is 2022. Thank you very much for joining me in the Breakfast Show. My name is Odhiambo. Remember, in the first bit of this particular show, because the Breakfast Show, we will be interacting as usual. The first bit of the show is such an interactive bit. Remember, getting to the second bit of this particular show, we will be getting to newspapers, of course, to review different newspapers that we already have in our studio today. Remember, we'll also get to look at what is coming up in the various sections and various subsections of those newspapers as we will begin to review them. Remember, also we'll get to the county section to see some of the news that or some of the stories that have transpired across our county level, of course, going by different counties across the various across the country. Remember, as well, we'll be getting to the business section to look at some of the stories, those that are given weight under the section of business. And so continue staying with me, join me in the breakfast show. Remember, before that, we'll also get to look at some of the top news stories, those that are given a lot of weight as far as some of the news are concerned, especially those that are being considered as the top news stories, those that are given a lot of weight. Shortly before we'll get to the newspapers review. Later, remember, we'll be getting to the third bit of the show, and remember, during the third bit of the show, as usual, we get to delve in one particular subject of study, because that particular story that which is perceived to be of public interest, that which is seen to be affecting the whole country, that of course which is seen to be affecting the entire society and community at large. And of course, today, getting to the third bit of the show, we'll be looking at the issue, we'll be looking at the issue of elections, of course, various roles as far as you as a voter is concerned, especially ahead of the general elections. Remember, general elections just less than 90 days, and there we'll be having our general elections. But getting to the third bit of the show today, because I'll be asking you, how prepared are you currently? We've seen political leaders, of course, campaign rallies in various regions, of course, trying to sell their political agenda ahead of the 9th August ballots, of course, eyeing various political positions, of course, under the county level, under the ward level, and even under the national level. But remember, you as the Kenyan citizen, you as a voter, is the one to decide their fate. But how are you prepared? Remember, you can get to share with us through our social media platforms. Of course, our fan page, Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Instagram is Pure Africa TV, YouTube is Pure Africa TV. Remember, you tweeting, hashtag is the breakfast show live at Pure Africa TV. You tweeting, Twitter at Pure Africa TV, hashtag breakfast show. I'll be getting your comment, of course, as we continue. I'll be reading some of your comments, especially during the first bit of the show and the last bit of the show, or of course the third bit of the show when we'll get there. Remember, I'm asking you today, what is your role, or how are you prepared as a Kenyan citizen, of course, going by the roles you need to play, especially ahead of the general elections. Remember, it is now less than 90 days to the general elections. Of course, we also see voter validations ongoing. But it's also time you can get to the nearest IEBC office and check if your voter details, voter confidentials, if they are up to date, of course, and get to validate your details ahead of the 9th August 2022 general elections. Of course, those are just some of the preparations that are ongoing ahead of the general elections. Also, we see leaders rallying their campaigns ahead of the 9th August general elections, of course, ahead of the ballot. But the question today is, how are you prepared? How are you prepared? You as a Kenyan citizen, you as a voter. Of course, we've seen a majority of the citizens crying each and every time after general elections that I wish I knew. But remember, the time is now. How are you prepared to do it once and for all? Of course, majority have been looking forward to those leaders who can bring change, those leaders who can stand in for development, those leaders who can look into the affairs of the entire citizens, or of the all citizens, and not just for a small section. But it is you to bring the change. But how are you prepared? Remember, that is the question that you'll be responding to even as we continue the show. Getting to the third bit of the show, I'll be gathering some of your comments on this particular question, because I'll be gathering some of your reactions as far as this particular question is concerned. There I'll be reading some of the response, of course, some of the reactions, some of the response as far as that question is concerned. Remember, you have the choice to decide who becomes a leader, because we have those political positions that are really competed for by majority or by many contestants. But remember, you are the person to decide who to take that political position, or who will fail to get it. Of course, we have those that are even being competed for by independent candidates. At the same time, those that are receiving competitions by leaders or by politicians, those that are allied to various political positions. But how are you prepared? You as a Kenyan citizen, you as a voter, how prepared are you ahead of the 9th general elections? Of course, the issue of running mates is once again there. We'll get to talk about it when we get to the second bit of the show, because we saw yesterday that particular task force, or that particular committee that was tasked with the responsibility of deciding the most suitable running mate for the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition presidential flag bearer Raila Amolo Odinga's running mate, of course, completing their task yesterday. Of course, this was announced by Noah Wekesa, who is the chairperson for that particular committee, or for that particular task force. Earlier on, again, we saw those shortlisted candidates, of course, getting there for interviews, getting there for conversations, of course, being interviewed to ascertain their suitability for those or for that particular political positions. But remember, that particular committee was to decide on the three most suitable candidates. Thereafter, the names of the three suitable candidates would be presented to the flag bearer for the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition. Of course, that is none other than Raila Odinga, who later would decide on the most suitable candidate to be his deputy, or to be his running mate. But remember, this the whole exercise was to be done yesterday, or that particular presentation of the name was to be done yesterday. But later, we saw the team led by the chairperson for that particular committee, of course, Noah Wekesa, postponing that, saying that it was pushed forward because or due to the fact that the flag bearer, of course, Raila Amolo Odinga, was not within the town. Of course, Raila was rallying his political campaigns, of course, in the coastal region, but said that the presentation was to be done yesterday. And so today, Kenyans look forward to who are the three most suitable candidates that shall be presented to the Azimio la Umoja Oka presidential flag bearer, of course, Raila Odinga, who shall later decide, or who will later decide who is the most suitable among those particular three candidates that shall be presented to him. And of course, it's a matter of time. We'll get to wait and see who will finally get there. Remember, these are just preparations ahead of the general elections, of course, 9th August 2022 ballot. Remember, later, after the three names shall be presented to the ODM leader Raila Odinga, who will decide one most suitable candidate for that political position. Later, of course, we'll see them presenting the name of the most suitable candidate to the IEBC, of course, on or before 16th of May 2022. Of course, that is according to the statement, or according to the directive that was given by the registrar of political parties and the return. So 16th will be the deadline for presentation of the name of the running mate for presidential flag bearers or for presidential candidates, not just presidential flag bearers. That is the same case for the gubernatorial aspirants. Remember, by the day 16th day of this month of May 2022, they are expected to present the name of their running mates, both those vying under political parties, and at the same time those that are going, or those that are vying as independent candidates. So by 16th, they are expected to present. Remember, these are some of the stories that we'll be getting to when we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, we'll be looking at them deeply. Of course, we also see earlier on, we also saw Kalonzo also getting to face the panel, despite the fact that he had said earlier, or contrary to the fact that he had said earlier that he would not be facing that panel for the interview. Of course, we saw him getting to face the interview. Remember, getting to the second bit of the show, of course, now that the process for deciding, or the process by that particular committee is complete, I'll get to let you know the names of the candidates who faced the committee, of course, who were interviewed for that political position. Of course, when we get to the second bit of the show, those are some of the stories that we'll be looking at when we get to that bit. Of course, the political bit, the political section. Of course, we saw Raila in his 4-day campaign tour in coastal region. Of course, yesterday we saw him rallying his campaigns in Tana River County, of course, Hola. Remember, today he'll be proceeding on to Kilifi County, and of course, the issue of Juakali is very significant, of course, in the latest campaigns with the ODM leader, as well as the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya presidential flag bearer. Of course, is seen to be emphasizing on those that are working under Juakali industry, Juakali sector. We'll get to look at that deeply when we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, we also see DP Ruto now calling upon the influence of churches on political arena, especially as far as the topmost political position is concerned. Of course, that is none other than the presidential position. Remember, the issue of the support for churches, especially in terms of finance, has been very controversial, especially looking at the movement of the Deputy President William Ruto, making that reference to his contributions to churches. Of course, he has once again reiterated on it that churches should now officially announce their stance with those presidential candidates, that those that have been standing with them and offering them various supports. So we get to talk about that when we get to the second bit of the show. Meanwhile, we are getting official to the first bit of the show. Of course, during the first bit of the show, it's such an interactive bit of the show. What you need to do is to let me know where you're tuned in from, where you are watching from, of course, where you are able to follow this particular show from. Remember, this is the Breakfast Show, live from Pure Africa TV. My name is Odhiambo. Join me, Heaven, as we begin the first bit of this particular show. Of course, our fan page, Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Instagram Pure Africa TV, Twitter at Pure Africa TV. Remember, the hashtag is the Breakfast Show. There I'll be getting your tweets. Of course, I'll be getting your comments. Remember, you can as well drop your comments via WhatsApp number. The number is 079684 0560, 079684 0560. I'll be getting your comment, of course, through that particular number. That is our WhatsApp number. Of course, during the first bit, I'll be reading some of your comments as far as you will be dropping them in the real time. Then again, you can get to follow us through our official app. Of course, that is Pure Africa TV official app. Very simple. Just get to your Google Play Store. You not having your Pure Africa TV official app, get to your Android smartphone. Of course, get to your Google Play Store App Store. Then type their PATV. There you'll be having our Pure Africa TV official app. Of course, having that particular app, there is also a comment section. You can as well drop your comments. Remember, having that particular app. At the same time, you'll be following all our live shows and programs both from Pure Africa TV and at the same time from Pure Africa Radio. So join me in the Breakfast Show. My name is Evans Odhiambo. The Breakfast Show begins. And thank you very much for joining me in the Breakfast Show. Remember, this is the first bit of this particular show, that particular bit that we get to interact. Of course, this that particular bit that I look at the comment section, of course, of the Pure Africa TV official app. Look at our social media platforms. Of course, you see those that are already tuned and looking at the social media platforms. Of course, I see Director Israel Maro already following the show. Then Chamasi there, of course, saying I'm not prepared for, I am not yet sure if IEBC are well prepared for free and fair election. Of course, that's a response to the question that I asked, that you as a Kenyan citizen, you as a voter, how are you prepared, especially ahead of the 9th August general elections, of course, ahead of the ballot? How are you prepared? Of course, it is you to decide the fate of the leadership of the country. Of course, it is you to decide who fits to which political position, especially considering that there are some political positions that are very competitive, of course, having a lot of contestants that have shown their interests over those political positions. Of course, what going by that comment, of course, you realize that there are also a larger number or a bigger number of youths that are getting to register, are getting to have their national identity cards, of course, registering as voters, but finally fail to vote. But finally fail to vote. Of course, that is going by the analysis or going by some of the statistics that were earlier raised by some of the analysts, of course, concerning the elections. Realize that the majority of youths do not vote despite them striving to obtain their national identity cards and striving to obtain their or to register as voters. And so the big question is why do they fail to register, do they fail to vote even after striving for all that to get their identity cards and also to get to register as voters. Of course, the lack of trust in some political leaders has been a question, has been a response as far as that particular question is being answered. But remember, it is you to change the leadership, it is you to change, of course, get the responsible leaders. But the question, especially getting to the third bit of the show, will be how are you prepared? You as a voter, you as a Kenyan citizen, how prepared are you ahead of that? Remember that we'll be getting to it, or I'll be reading your reactions when we get to the third bit of the show soon. But getting to the second bit of the show, of course, we'll begin with some of the top news stories that are here. Then later we'll get to the news, to the newspapers. Of course, we'll get to review the newspapers, and looking at the Star newspaper, looking at the front page, we now see IBC 6 window to open sealed ballot boxes. That's a story that is given the top coverage there. Of course, before we get to the newspaper review, let's look at some of the top news stories, those that are given away today in the breakfast show. Of course, we see presentation of the names of the three suitable candidates for running mate for the Azimio la Umoja Oka presidential flag bearer Raila Amolo Odinga is postponed. Of course, yesterday we saw the chairperson for this particular task force. Of course, this was none other than Wekesa, of course, saying that them as the task force, them as that particular committee, they were ready. Of course, we also saw earlier on, we also saw candidates getting there, of course, interested candidates getting there for the interview, of course, to face the panel and be ascertained whether they are the most suitable for that particular positions. Of course, among the candidates that presented, or among the candidates that got there or that faced the panel, include, of course, the first day we saw Shabina Chege getting to face the panel. That was the Moranga women representative, of course, centering on public delivery. Said that should they get that particular chance, then she would actually decide, she would actually center on public service delivery. She would really deliver for the public. That was according to Sabina Chege, of course, the Moranga woman representative, during that particular time that she faced the ballot. Later we saw earlier San Joe, of course, the governor from Mombasa County, also facing the panel. Of course, he said that is the most suitable for that. Of course, he's also very optimistic that he would get to be chosen as the most suitable candidate. Later on, we saw the Kakamega governor Wycliffe Ambetsa Oparanya also facing the panel, of course, also emphasizing on his work experience. He said that he has a record of good work experience that would qualify him most to be the best suitable candidate for the Azimio la Umoja presidential flag bearers running mate. The same day we saw Martha Karua also get to face the panel. Of course, Martha Karua is the party leader for NARC Kenya, or is the leader for NARC Kenya party, also saying she is very ready to work for the people of Kenya. Should it be decided upon, should she be picked to serve under that political position. Later we saw from Gatundu MP, that is Peter Kenneth, also getting to face the panel. Of course, said that still he will be member of the Azimio la Umoja, whether he'll get to be picked or not. His support for Azimio la Umoja, one Kenya presidential flag bearer, will not stop whether he will be picked or not. He's vowed and said that his support or his relentless support to the ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga would still continue even after that. Later we saw Peter Monya, of course, the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary, also facing the panel. Then later we saw we also saw Stephen Tarus also facing the panel. Of course, we also saw we saw Kalonzo Musyoka also getting to face the panel. Of course, the Wiper Party leader. This was very contrary to his earlier sentiments that he will not be facing it. Interestingly, we saw him saying that it was a bit of it was sort of a conversation. It was sort of a conversation, not job seeking interview. Of course, he also said that he decided to face the panel on his own, or he decided to face it due to his willingness, of course, to try to avoid many questions that would emerge later, especially would he fail to face that particular panel. Of course, you saw see the task force saying yesterday that they were very ready. Of course, they were very ready, done with the interviews, done with everything, done with their analysis, and they were to present three names to the ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga, but later realized that ODM leader was not in the town, and so they had to postpone that particular presentation. They had to postpone the presentation for those three suitable candidates, having conducted their interview, having looked at them, of course, having gone through their presentations, especially as far as that political position is concerned. And so is a story that is being looked at by, of course, that is being anticipated by majority of the citizens. Of course, eyes are on this particular panel, of course, as they will be doing their presentation to the ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga to decide who are the three suitable candidates. Remember, later among the three, ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga, of course, the flag bearer for the Azimio la Umoja Oka, will finally decide on who is the most suitable of the three that will be presented to him. Three names were to be presented to Raila yesterday. Of course, he would now pick the very best. Then to fit the Azimio la Umoja presidential running mate, to pick the Azimio la Umoja presidential running mate, of course, is something that is being anticipated by Kenyan citizens, at the same time by members that are allied to Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition. Remember, the issue of running mate has been very debatable. Of course, it has been very controversial recently, especially going by the sentiments of some sections, or going by the sentiments of a section of politicians that are allied to a given political leader, to a given political party leader. Of course, we saw the other day a section that are allied to Kalonzo Musyoka, of course, the Wiper Party leader, saying that should Kalonzo not get that political position, then they are likely to think otherwise. Of course, they are likely to quit. That's that was a move. Those are some of the sentiments, of course, from those that are allied to Kalonzo. At the same time, earlier on we saw them also vehemently opposed to the interviews, especially as far as Kalonzo was to face this particular panel. But later on we saw the Wiper Party leader facing the panel willingly, and of course that was it. But now it's a matter of time. Let's wait and see who are the three most suitable candidates that will be decided on, and who will finally be settled on by the ODM leader, who is also the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya presidential flag bearer. Of course, I remember this particular exercise is to be completed before 16th of May 2022. The ODM leader of the presidential flag bearers, not only for the Azimio la Umoja Oka, not just for Kenya Kwanza, but at the same time for those that are vying as independent candidates. Remember, before 16th of May, they are supposed to present the names of their running mates to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, of course, as earlier directed by the registrar of political parties. And not just them, but even those that are eyeing gubernatorial positions. Remember, the gubernatorial candidates, or those gubernatorial candidates for various counties, are also to present the names of their running mates to the IEBC on or before that particular date. Of course, that is the 16th May 2022. Maybe switching gears aside from the running mate story, we see now Raila in 4 days campaign tour in the coastal region. Of course, yesterday we saw ODM leader rallying his campaigns ahead of the 9th August ballot, of course, presidential elections. Of course, yesterday was in Tana River County, of course, in Hola, where he promised to zero rate corruption upon entry to office. Of course, now we see leaders talking about the issue of corruption, but at the same time, remember, there are some leaders that are faced by corruption scandals, and so each and the issue of corruption is becoming at the center stage of political rallies, as far as political campaigns are being mentioned. The issue of fight for corruption is at the center yet again. But what's your view as far as the issue of fighting corruption, especially by political leaders, is concerned? Remember, you can drop your comments via our various comment platforms. Of course, remember, you can as well drop it, you following through our social media platforms. Remember, we are live at Facebook. You can as well drop your comment there, of course, to react to some of the stories that we are looking at this particular morning. What do you think about leaders fighting corruption? At the same time, there are leaders who are faced with corruption scandals. What do you think about that? Of course, it's ironical in a way. Of course, we see Raila promising to zero rate corruption upon entry to office. At the same time, great change, of course, promising a great change for the Kenyan citizen just 100 days after his entry to office. So remember, these are some of these agenda, especially yesterday in the coastal region of Kenya. At the same time, is unflinching his support for the Juakali sector. Is unflinching support for the Juakali sector, of course, saying that Juakali, of course, lauding Juakali sector, and saying that they as well should get just fair treatment like any other sector, despite the fact that they never got training for that in learning institutions or in tertiary or tertiary level of education, or universities and colleges, but they gained the experience through their hard work or through their training on those particular skills, and so they as well need equal treatment, just like these other people who got some level of education to get to those particular to deliver such services, services. Moving forward to the next story, of course, we see now DP Ruto calls for influence of churches on political arena. Of course, we saw Deputy President William Ruto, of course, saying that time has come whereby churches should openly announce those that have ever been supporting them, especially as far as the presidential race is concerned. Those presidential aspirants that have ever shown their unflinching support to the churches across the country. And of course, talking about this supporting churches, of course, it has been also very controversial. It has been very debatable. Remember, there's a time that it was being related to campaigns in churches, of course, that saw the controversy emerge yet again. Now, DP Ruto saying that churches should now announce openly those particular politicians or those presidential flag bearers that have ever stood with them. Remember, DP Ruto has been is known as one of the presidential flag bearers that have ever stood with the churches, of course, during their church arambles and contributions. Of course, DP has not been missing in has not been missing in church, of course, saying that this is very important ahead of the 9th general elections, especially for the presidential race. At the same time, we see him reiterating on the importance of a bottom-up economic model, of course, drawing its reference closely to the Bible. Of course, this was very interesting when he drew his reference closely to the Bible, saying that bottom-up economic model is as well supported in the Bible, of course, making its reference from the book of Psalms also. There, of course, DP promised to support those small business enterprises to see them growing, of course, as he employs his bottom-up economic strategy or bottom-up economic model to see those small businesses rise to greater to the next level, of course, to see Kenyan citizens benefit from whatever small businesses that they transact on a daily basis. At the same time, we saw him promising to support small-scale businesses, of course, to grow. Remember, these are some of the top stories that are captured, especially in the world of politics. But later, remember, we are soon now getting to the newspaper section, where we'll be reviewing some of the newspapers. Of course, we'll begin yet again with the politics. Later, we'll proceed to the business, and later we'll see some of the stories that are transpiring from the county level. Those that are transpiring from this county level, sub-county levels, of course, those that are also unfolding from the village level. And so remember, Pure Africa TV is your destination of choice for both local and international content. Not just local, international content, but remember, local and international entertainment as well. And so continue staying with me. Those have been some of the top news stories. I'm taking a very short break, but coming later, we are now getting to newspapers. Of course, we have the Star newspaper. Looking at the front page of this newspaper, we see IEBC 6 window to open sealed ballot boxes. Of course, that's a big point, of course, that is given coverage in the front page of this. We'll be getting to that in a short while, of course, to look at some of the stories, especially politics, sports, business, and county section. Continue staying with me. My name is Odhiambo, taking a very short break to come later with much more. staying with me in the Breakfast Show. Remember, this is the Breakfast Show coming to you live from Pure Africa TV. My name is Odhiambo. Join me even as we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, as we get to the newspapers, of course, we have the Star newspaper here looking at the front page. We see now IBC6 window to open sealed ballot boxes, among many other stories. Of course, we are looking at them. But remember, there's this question that I've asked. Of course, getting to the third bit of the show, I would like to get your comments, of course, your viewpoints, your reaction to this, especially ahead of the 9th general election, 9th August general election. How prepared are you as a Kenyan citizen? How prepared are you as a voter, of course, ahead of the general elections? Remember, it is now less than 100 days to the general elections. Meanwhile, we see different politicians rallying and lobbying their campaigns ahead of various political seats, ahead of various political positions. But remember, you as a Kenyan citizen, you as a voter is the one to decide the fate of these political leaders. That again, considering that each and every time after elections, we've been seeing Kenyans, of course, Kenyan citizens begin to cry because I wish I knew I would elect so and so. But how are you prepared? How are you prepared as far as that is concerned? Of course, majority have been looking forward to those particular leaders and politicians, those that can bring development, those that can actually bring change. But remember, you are to decide their fate by your election, through your elections, of course, through your vote. But how are you prepared? Remember, you can share with us via our social media platforms as well as other comment sections. Of course, Facebook, we are live at Pure Africa TV, Instagram Pure Africa TV, Twitter at Pure Africa TV. Remember, the hashtag is the Breakfast Show there. I'll be getting your comments, your tweets on how you are ready or how you are prepared for the 9th August general elections. How prepared are you? Remember, you can as well drop your comments via our WhatsApp number. Of course, the number is 07968405 60. I'll be getting your comments, of course. Getting to the third bit of the show, I'll be reading your comments. Now join me in the newspaper review, of course, looking at the Star newspaper. Looking at the front page, we see now IEBC 6 window to open seal the ballot. Of course, the communication once okay to open boxes if presiding officers wrongly put any stray materials. Of course, that's a move by IEBC, especially as preparations for the general elections are ahead there. Of course, they are trying to ensure that it will be free and fair. Remember, the question of free and fair in election has been that also which has been very controversial yet again, not just in elections but also during nominations. Of course, the party primaries. Remember what happened in various political parties, what happened in various regions or in various political seats as the parties were doing their party primaries and were conducting their nominations. So the issue of free and fair election is once again on the rise. Of course, talking about the free and fair election, remember also the sentiments of some politicians that are allied to Kenya Kwanza. Of course, those that were proposing that IEBC should now get into some of the leaders, or should now probe some of the leaders that are seen to be in political campaigns for Azimio la Umoja, Kenya Kwanza. At the same time, they are cabinet secretaries and public servants. Of course, those that were mentioned during that particular time, among them were cabinet secretary for Interior, of course, Dr. Fred Matiang'i. There we saw Joe Musheru of ICT, and of course we saw Peter Monya of Agriculture. Of course, these were revolving around free and fair elections, saying that some of these or the entry of some of these servants, or some of these state servants, or some of these cabinet ministry secretaries into political campaigns could jeopardize the free and fair elections. Of course, that which was seen to be very, controversial, that was seen to be very controversial. Now IBC is now seeking window to open sealed ballot boxes. Of course, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission is also strategizing just to see that everything is fair. All the voting materials are in order. Of course, the boxes are also in order. Nothing is corrupted ahead of the 9th August general election. Ahead of the 9th August general election, of course, chaired by the IEBC chairperson, IEBC chairman Wafula Chebukati. Those are some of the preparations that are being made, of course, ahead of the 9th August general election. And moving forward to the next story, of course, from apart from that, moving to the next story, of course, we see now Ruto outlines plans for free security sector from cartels. Because DP has ever reiterated on this, especially going by his recent campaign tours in various regions, of course. Talking yet again the issue, or talking about yet again the issue of corruption, the issue of corruption. Each and every political leader is now pushing, or each and every presidential flag bearer is pushing to zero rate corruption, pushing to zero rate corruption. But at the same time, you realize that there are quite a good number of leaders that are also faced by corruption scandals. What do you think about this? Is it ironical? Of course, some would say it is so ironical that leaders are now talking about zero rating corruption. At the same time, it is the leaders that are involved in corruption scandals. Now we see Deputy President William Ruto has promised to overhaul the current Jubilee government procurement regime to ensure security-related tenders are not shrouded in secrecy. Of course, he said that secret dealings are chances of corruption. Secret dealings are chances of corruption, that everything should be transparent. Every deal should be transparent, especially in the security sector. We saw DP talking about the security sector, purchasing of guns and source of those. Of course, the Kenya Kwanza presidential aspirant said he will start radical changes in the office of the president so that the purchase of guns and other security hardware is done transparently and not in secret. As said, the secret dealings could be a chance for corruption, or could be a leeway to corruption. The DP warned that the current scenario where the purchase of security-related equipment is regarded as sensitive national security procurement is prone to abuse and massive corruption. Of course, that was according to the DP during an interview with the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya. Said the corruption is thriving in the government, especially in the buying of the national security equipment. Of course, that was according to DP Ruto, of course, yesterday being interviewed. Moving forward to the next story, now we see Raila to receive three names for deputy. Raila to receive three names for deputy. Remember, these three names are to be presented to him by the task force of that particular committee that was entrusted with the responsibility of deciding the most suitable running mate for the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition presidential flag bearer, of course, the ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga. I mean, yesterday, remember the presentation was to be done to him yesterday, but considering that he was not in town, that is according to the chairperson for that particular task force, that is none other than our case, are saying that they had to postpone it, unfortunately, and present the name to ODM leader later, who in effect will declare or will announce publicly to the Kenyan citizen who he has finally decided to pick as his most suitable running mate for the presidential race. Of course, Azimio's presidential candidate Raila Amolo Odinga will on Thursday, of course today, received 3 names. So today, the whole country is eyeing to this particular committee or to this particular task force presenting the three best candidates. Raila, of course, will decide on one most suitable candidate, and later will get to announce it to the public. Of course, this is to be done today. Of course, the search team chaired by former Kwanza MP Noah Wekesa was to hand over its recommendations yesterday, but later got to postpone that. However, they shelved the idea last minute in what was explained as unavailability of the former prime minister and the former prime minister. Of course, we see Wekesa trailing the members of the fourth estate, so telling some of the journalists that were present there that the Odhiambo boss assured the committee of his unavailability on Thursday. Of course, that is today, to receive the report. Of course, going by the sentiments of Noah Wekesa, the report is already done, everything is complete. What is remaining is just to present the report to the presidential flag bearer for the Azimio la Umoja One Kenya Alliance. Meanwhile, we see. Meanwhile, moving to the next story, of course, we see IBC should engage everyone on laws timelines. Of course, this is a sentiment by Mule Musau. By Mule Musau saying IEBC should engage everyone on laws timelines. Of course, that is also captured under that political position. Of course, ahead of, you expect such like stories, especially as far as this particular time is considered, when the country is just some few months ahead of the general election. Then I have fought tirelessly for devolution, says Raila. Of course, it's the former prime minister saying that he has tirelessly fought for the devolved government. Also, he has tirelessly fought for devolution. Of course, he has finally reiterated. We see ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga, of course, maintaining that his government will receive the push for more funding to the counties through Building Bridges initiative if he is elected to be the fifth president of the Republic of Kenya. Of course, we see Raila saying that the intention of the planned constitutional amendment was to have devolution strengthened from its current form. Of course, saying that he has really fought for devolution. Of course, he was speaking yesterday in Taita Taveta. Speaking yesterday, of course, in Tana River yesterday as he rallies his campaign in the coastal region. Of course, the Azimio presidential candidate said for a long time the country had lagged behind on development. Of course, saying that this, he pointed out, was due to the bad leadership that was in place since the independence. Of course, he has now vowed to change the leadership, of course, to ensure that there will be a lot of changes should the Azimio Oka clinch, or in the Azimio government, should he clinch to the topmost seat, of course, the presidential seat, saying that just in 100 days, or within 100 days, or after 100 days in office, then the country will realize tremendous changes in his regime. Of course, he said the sessional paper number 10 of 1965 created a policy that so the government starved counties like Tana River and others of deserved resources. While also took credit of the passing of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, saying despite resistance from some quarters, it was that successful. Of course, these are some of the sentiments or some of the statements that were seen during Raila's campaign yesterday. Remember, today he'll be getting to Kwale. Today he'll be getting to Kilifi County, of course. And finally, Saturday he'll be getting to Mombasa County, of course, teaming up his political campaigns, of course, lobbying his political agenda ahead of the 2022 presidential bid in the coastal region, in the coastal region of Kenya. Then we see, of course, this will be get to tackle and get to the business section. Then we see MP's wife also. These are some of the stories that we'll get in the county section, but now let's switch gears and get to the business section. Of course, we see some of the stories that are transpiring from the business section. Of course, going by the Kenyan economy, of course, the majority would say that the country is now facing very tough economic times. Because look at the education timeline, the education calendar is tight. Yet again, the country is struggling financially. Of course, we see the Kenya Bank's macroeconomic profile weak. Of course, Moody's, that's a statement that is captured there, of course, under the business section. We see unlocking economic dividends from the Kenyan's blue economy. That's a story that is given the top coverage under this particular section. Of course, this is the political section. Remember, you can as well continue dropping your comments via our comment section. You may be following live through our social media platforms. Of course, we are live at Facebook as well. You can drop your comments there in the real time. Of course, getting the third bit of the show, I'll be getting them. And remember, today what I'll be gathering your comments on is how prepared you are towards the general elections. Of course, remember, it's just less than 100 days and there will be having our general elections. But how are you prepared, you as a voter? Remember, you can drop your comment on that or concerning that. Getting to the third bit of the show, I'll be getting your comments. Of course, I'll be reading some of the comments. Continuing to look at some of the stories, of course, under the business section. Under the business section, we see Kenya's pursuit of the blue economy has now received renowned vigor with a view to unlocking economic potentials arising from the same. Of course, it is now well understood that the blue economy presents vast opportunities for suitable economic growth and job creation. And so we see now focus getting to the blue economy. However, in order to harness the full potential of the blue economy, it is necessary to encourage and foster an innovative culture that is willing to grasp opportunities as they present themselves and take calculated risk targeted at maximizing these particular opportunities. Of course, the bit of blue economy is captured under the business section. Of course, the blue economy is also becoming that which is very lucrative, especially going by the economic time, or going by the Kenyans economic time. Moving forward to the next story, of course, we see now the tax appeal tribunal bill will abuse taxpayers. Audit wants. Tax appeal tribunal bill will abuse taxpayers. Of course, that's a story that is also captured there. Auditors sound warning on that particular bill. Because the tax appeal tribunal bill, we see audit firm as now warned of the higher cost of doing business and potential abuse by authorities if MPs pass the tax appeals tribunal bill. Of course, according to the taxpayers may be forced, of course, according to them, taxpayers may be forced to borrow money to meet the required deposits in carrying unexpected costs. Remember, this is also revolving around the recently read budget for the 2022-23 financial budget, of course, whereby we saw the economic analysts, of course, saying that the country is likely to continue borrowing because the spending rate is much higher than the income rate of the country. And so the issue of borrowing, taxation also on the rise again. Of course, this proposal is contained in the Finance Bill 2022 which is being subjected to public participation by the Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly. Of course, looking at that particular bill is keenly, you'll realize that it seeks to require taxpayers aggrieved by the tribunal's decision to deposit 50% of the disputed tax in a special account at the Central Bank of Kenya before filing the appeal at the High Court. Of course, that's the proceeding for that. But remember, once all the appeals have been exhausted and the court has ruled in favor of the taxpayer, then the Kenya Revenue Authority shall refund the amount within 30 days to the matter's financial or final determination. Of course, that is how this particular bill is being, or the proceeding, or the proceeding of this particular bill. And moving forward to the next story, of course, that is captured under this same bit of the business, or under this particular section, of course, the business section. And now we see Uhuru officially opens clothing farm at Athi River, EPZ. Of course, such a company as the company projected to increase its current employment number to 4,200 people beyond, of course, by the end of last year. And of course, that is a plus. That would be a plus to that particular sector, of course, clothing farm. Now let's look at this particular story. Of course, we see President Uhuru Kenyatta has opened the mass estimates of Kenya, of course, Sri Lanka and April, and the textile manufacturers that has empowered employment of over 3,000 Kenyans. Of course, we saw President speaking at the launch ceremony at the river. This was here Wednesday, of course. President saying that the huge investment is a statement to decide, or the long-term groundwork laid under the manufacturing pillar. Of course, this is also closely related to the Big Four agenda, of course, going by the terms and the sentiments of the said president, of course, by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Also captured under the business sector. Remember, this is a story that is also captured under this particular sector, the business sector. Of course, this particular bit. And moving forward to the next story, of course, we see Toyota cuts production due to COVID lockdown in Shanghai. Of course, a story that is also given coverage there. As far as the production of the Toyota, of course, in relation to the COVID lockdown. Remember, the COVID-19 lockdown is that which was seen to be towards devastative effects on the economy, but now you can see you can realize that the economy is regaining, of course, going by various business transactions. Of course, realize that they are now rejuvenating back to their initial positions before the country was really affected by the COVID-19. But let's now look at this particular story. Of course, we see Toyota says it will suspend operations at more production lines at its factories in Japan this month due to the coronavirus lockdown in Shanghai. Of course, the firm says the production halt will come into effect on Monday and stay in place until the end of next week. Of course, it is also the latest big car market to announce that it is being impacted by the COVID-19 measures in China. Of course, meanwhile, we see Tesla has also reportedly halted most production as its Shanghai plant due to problems with the sourcing parts. Of course, this is a story that is given coverage under the business section. Remember, you can continue dropping your comments via our social media platforms, our various comment sections. Remember, you can as well drop your comment via our WhatsApp number. Of course, the number is 0796840560. I'll be getting your comments in real time. Getting to the third bit, I'll be reading some of the comments. Remember, getting to the third bit, that particular discussion or that particular discussion I'll get to gather your comments on is your preparation ahead of the general election. You as a voter, you as a Kenyan citizen, how prepared are you ahead of the general elections? Of course, earlier on we saw some response, of course, going by the free and fair election. But how are you prepared ahead of the general elections? You as a voter, you as a Kenyan citizen. Remember, it is you to decide the fate of the leadership of the country. It is you to decide on that particular leader who will see developmental projects come in that particular region where you come from, that your particular county, of course, even up to the national level. But how prepared are you? Remember, your comments I'll be getting and looking at them when you get to the third bit of the show. I'm gonna take a very short break. Coming later, we'll get into the county section as we summarize the newspaper review today. Then later we'll be getting to the third bit, whereby I'll be gathering your comments even as we'll be coming to the end of this particular show. Continue staying with me. Meanwhile, continue dropping your comment, continue tweeting. Remember, hashtag is the Breakfast Show, Twitter at Pure Africa TV. My name is Evans Odhiambo, taking a very short break there. Later I'll be back with much more. Continue staying with me. To the breakfast show. Of course, this is the second bit of this particular show. Thank you for choosing Pure Africa TV. Thank you for choosing the breakfast show. Remember, we are now getting to the county section to look at some of the stories that have transpired from the county level, of course, from the sub county level as well. And looking at the stories, of course, we see Mbukafi farmers are now to benefit from revised reforms. Of course, that's a story that is captured there. Of course, Embu County being captured under that particular section, and later on we'll also see the issue of the woman position in leadership also captured there later, of course, as we'll be moving later. But let's look at this particular story of Embu County, because we now see Embu coffee farmers to benefit from revised reforms. Of course, coffee farmers in Embu County are now set to benefit from revised reforms under the price stabilization framework released by the Ministry of Agriculture. Of course, this was on Tuesday. Chairman of the County Technical Committee on Coffee Price established framework to, of course, said the farmers will be pleased with the changes. Of course, that would be a plus to the coffee farmers in Embu County, of course, as they will be getting to that as one of the economic activities yet again that they of course also enhancing employment opportunities. Of course, they said after the committee was appointed by the Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Peter Munya last year, it compiled a report launched on 5th of May. Of course, that is in Embu. Moving forward to the next story, of course, under the county section, we see Gatundu residents. Gatundu residents now urged to plant indigenous trees. Of course, this also a story that is captured, of course, reflecting on Gatundu sub-county. We see environmentalists from Mama Ngina University have now urged Gatundu residents to plant indigenous trees now to restore the ecosystem destroyed over the last years. Of course, the university principal, Professor James Kangui, raised concerns over the dominance of gravilla trees. Of course, most farms in the area saying that should diseases strike and the prices regions would be adversely affected. Of course, trees as water catchment area, also as wind protection, especially against the erosion of the soil or soil erosion. And moving forward to the next story, of course, under the county section, we see the issue of the running mate yet again coming up. Of course, now see MP Wahome now tells Ruto to pick woman for Central from Central as a running mate. Remember, the issue of the running mate has also been very controversial, both at county level and also at the national level. Now we see MP Wahome now tells Ruto to pick a woman a woman as a running mate, especially as far as the Kenya Kwanza coalition is being concerned. Remember, there has been that question again as to who would be the most suitable running mate for various political coalitions, for various political parties, and even for the various individuals who are vying, or for various aspirants who are going as independent candidates. And so the issue of a woman in the top position or in the second most top position is also reiterated on again as to whether a woman would make a difference should they be given chance of being the running mates to various presidential flag bearers. Of course, remember in Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition the other time, of course, we saw a section of women proposing Martha Karua, the NARC Kenya party leader, as the most suitable running mate for the ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga. The same case now we see in the Kenya Kwanza coalition. Of course, MP Wahome now pushing for a woman position for the running mate, for the position of the running mate for deputy president in the Kenya Kwanza coalition ahead of the presidential race, of course, just some few months there. Now we see Kandara MP Alice Wahome has told Deputy President William Ruto to pick a female running mate from the central region. Remember, the issue of the region is also on consideration. Is also a factor that is being considered as far as this is concerned. As far as the same is concerned, of course, that particular region that is being considered as the most vote-rich region, which would influence a lot of voters. And so the analysts say that the choice of a running mate is also very influential as far as the vote attraction is being concerned. And to say that should a running mate be picked from that particular region that is being treated as the most vote-rich region, then that particular coalition of that flag bearer for the presidential race is likely to harvest a lot of voters coming from that particular region, as opposed to when a running mate is picked from a region that has a small number of voters, or that has a small number of voters. And that is why the issue of central Kenya has been on the rise again. That is why the issue of central Kenya is being centered on again. So regional balance, the same time gender balance, regional balance and gender balance, yet again mentioned as some of the factors as far as this particular flag bearers, or of course the presidential flag bearers, will be settling on the most suitable candidates to fit to as their deputies, to fit as their running mate. Of course, Wahome said though other members of the Kenya Kwanza Alliance would want the position to go to their regions, Ruto should consider central this time. Of course, that was according to Kandara, member of parliament. Of course, this was none other than Alice Wahome. Of course, he was speaking on Tuesday during a tree planting exercise, where she said the move will also ensure there is a gender balance in leadership. Remember, the issue of gender balance was also directed there by the IEBC. Two-third gender balance, of course, looking at what some of the looking at the presentation of political parties, of course, how they are making their lineups as far as various political positions are concerned, from the smallest position or from the ward level to the national level. The issue of gender balance would be looked into. And of course, should it not be considered, should they fail to consider gender balance, then they would, or that particular presentation would face rejection according to the IEBC's earlier or prior sentiments. But these are seen reactions yet again emanating from various political parties, emanating from various political leaders. And of course, it is very debatable again as far as that gender balance, especially the two-third gender rule, is concerned. Of course, IBC will be looking at that, of course, going through the various presentations that were made by various political parties, and finally deciding to look at whether that particular presentation is meeting the basics or meeting the grounds that was set by the IEBC, Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Now, moving forward, we see now cartels as an excuse for poor leadership. Cartel as an excuse for poor leadership. Of course, this is also a story that is captured under the county section. Of course, sentiments of the Nairobi Senator of Nairobi County, Senator Johnson Sakaja. Of course, for many years, cartels have been blamed for frustrating Nairobi County government, resulting in poor leadership and services to residents. However, they have never been arrested and brought to justice despite cries by the county bosses. Of course, the Kenya Kwanza Coalition Nairobi governor aspirant or gubernatorial aspirant Johnson Sakaja now says cartels are an excuse used by leaders who have failed their duties, who have failed in their duties, now saying that cartels exist just because they have failed in their duties. Of course, you see him drawing reference from 2016 or 2016. The former Governor Evans Kidero admitted the city of Boss lost over 3 billion Kenya shillings to cartel. Of course, just drawing some of the examples, saying that leaders that have failed to administer or to deliver now blame cartels for their misdelivery or for failing to deliver effectively. And finally, looking at this particular section, of course, the county section, looking at the final story, of course, we see Rioba warns inciters ahead of August polls. Rioba now warns inciters ahead of the 9th August general elections. Remember, there's a time that different leaders, church leaders, and even various stakeholders are now talking of peace and brotherhood, unity, and peace ahead of the 2022 general elections. Of course, the August general election. But now we see Kitui Commissioner now warns inciters ahead of the August polls. Remember, there are those who have been inciting the public, of course, through various platforms. Some of them even use the social media platforms, of course, that which was really warned by the Interior Cabinet Minister of the Interior Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, earlier on, that those would face very strong actions, or they would face the wrath of the law. Yet again, we see Commissioner, of course, Kitui Commissioner, now warning against that yet again. Aspirants will engage in activities that breach peace ahead of the August polls will face the law. The Kitui County Security Committee warned. Of course, Chairperson Mbogai Rioba, who is also the county commissioner, said there will be no mercy or leniency for leaders who will be seen inciting the public to engage in election violence. Of course, saying that this is the time that the country needed to embrace unity. This is the time that the country need to embrace peace like never before. Of course, Rioba said the church is also concerned about security in the country and is working with the government agencies to ensure peace prevails throughout the electioneering period, during the election, and even after the election. Remember, we are now getting to the third bit of the show, but the question remains: how are you prepared as a Kenyan citizen? Are you, as a voter, how are you prepared to face the general elections, to ensure that you get the leaders, those that are likely to bring developmental changes or to bring in development? Of course, those particular leaders that are likely to see your region enhanced in terms of economic development, infrastructural development, and other facilities, of course, social amenities being developed. How are you prepared? You as a voter, you as a Kenyan citizen, of course, who is responsible to decide the fate of the leaders as far as various political positions, various political seats are concerned. How are you prepared? Remember, you can drop your comments via our comment section. Of course, our comment sections, are you following through our social pages or social media platforms? Our fan page Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Twitter at Pure Africa TV, hashtag Breakfast Show. And of course, you can as well drop your comment via our Pure Africa TV official app. There, the platform, there, the comment section. You drop your comment there. I'll be getting it in the real time, getting to the third bit of the show shortly. I'll be reading your comments, of course, especially considering the subject of debate, of concerning the subject of discussion today on the table during the third bit of the show. You can as well drop your comments via WhatsApp number. The number is 079684 0560. I'll be getting your comments in real time. Of course, reading them as we'll be coming to the end of the third and the last bit of the show. Continue staying with me. I'm taking a very short break. Coming later, I'll be reading your comments as we come to the end of the show. My name is Odhiambo. This is the Breakfast Show, live from Pure Africa TV. The third and the last bit of this particular show. Of course, I'm back to read some of the comments in our various comment sections, even as we come to the end of this particular show. Remember, today today that particular subject that we've been talking about was the preparedness of voters, or the voters' preparedness to general elections, especially during this time that it is just less than 100 days remaining ahead of the general elections. And so I was asking you, how are you prepared? How are you prepared ahead of the general election? Of course, considering that validation of details for voters is also still going on. Remember, you can as well revisit your nearest Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission office or IEBC office and get to validate your voter details. You doubting some of your voter details and your credentials, you can get to the nearest IEBC office, of course, to see that they are validated ahead of the 2022 general elections. Of course, just some days ahead. Remember, less than 100 days are remaining. We see politicians rallying their political, camping their political rallies ahead of the 9th August general election. But again, it is you to decide their fate. But how are you prepared? Remember, that's a question that I'm now looking at the comment sections, of course, to see some of your comments, your reactions, your viewpoints as that is concerned. Of course, I see Robert tuned from Moranga saying vote change, vote change, vote development. Because that's a comment. I'm moving forward to, of course, I see also Esther commenting that voting the right leaders, then enhancing peace and unity. Of course, that is Brian Owino from Homa Bay County. And there's Emily Volenta, of course, saying that this is now the time to focus on those leaders that are likely to bring change. Remember, those are just some of the comments, of course, as far as the topic of discussion today, as far as the subject of elections and preparedness of the voters ahead of the 9th August general elections are being concerned. Thank you for staying with me, of course, since we began the first bit of the show. Of course, you stayed with me during the second bit, and now we are in the third and the last bit of the show. We are coming to an end of it today. Of course, I would say thank you very much for staying with me. Continue tuning into Pure Africa TV. Of course, staying tuned at all time. This is the destination of a choice for both local and international content. At the same time, local and international entertainment. Stay with us always. Remember to join me tomorrow in the breakfast show exactly at 7 o'clock in the morning. My name is Odhiambo. Have a very wonderful day, and of course, remember always to stay safe. Bye for now.